Picture a woman in her prime, 45 years old. She has run a household for 20 years, raised children, managed servants, kept the accounts, hosted dinners that would make a modern restaurant manager weep, and done all of it in a corset so tight she couldn't take a full breath without planning it first. Now imagine that same woman, one Tuesday morning, sweating through her nightgown at 3 a.m, her heart hammering like it's trying to escape her rib cage, her face the colour of a cooked lobster, her sheets so wet she could wring them out. And imagine the doctor, the man she finally works up the courage to visit after 6 months of this, sitting across from her in his consulting room, looking at her over his spectacles and saying these exact words: "Madam, you're entering the climacteric. You are no longer, in the physiological sense, a woman. You are no longer a woman." Just like that. 45 years of womanhood, erased by a man with a stethoscope and an absolute certainty that he understood your body better than you did. Welcome to Victorian menopause, where the symptoms were real, the treatments were terrifying, and the medical profession had decided that the single most natural thing that happens to every woman who lives long enough was actually a form of disease. A disease called the change of life, the climacteric, the dangerous age, the period of revolution. They had about 15 names for it, not one of them was accurate, helpful, or kind. Victorian doctors genuinely believed that a woman's entire identity, her personality, her sanity, her purpose, her moral character, was controlled by her reproductive system. When that system ceased its functions, as they politely put it, they expected a kind of psychological disintegration to follow. Madness, hysteria, the complete unravelling of everything that made you a proper Victorian female. And if you didn't unravel, if you just continued, got on with your life, managed the hot flashes, handled the sleepless nights and kept the household running, that was also suspicious. That might mean you were repressing something, which was almost worse. Some women were put in rest cures, locked in rooms, forbidden from reading, forbidden from working, forbidden from leaving. Because the doctor said the brain needed to stop compensating for the failing uterus, and any mental activity during this critical period might cause permanent damage. Some women were sent to hydropathic establishments, sanitariums built around cold water, where attendants would wrap them in wet sheets for hours at a time. Others were prescribed laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol, and told to take it every few hours for the anxiety. Some were prescribed ergot of rye, which causes muscle contractions so violent it was also used to induce labour as a treatment for hot flashes. And through all of it, the one thing nobody would tell you, not your mother, not your friends, not your husband, not your doctor, was what was actually happening, or that it would eventually stop, because talking about it was shameful, because bodies were shameful, because being a middle-aged woman in Victorian England meant performing youthfulness and health and sexual neutrality all at once, and admitting that your body was doing something inconvenient and unpredictable was a form of social failure. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know what kind of person listens to a 40-minute episode about Victorian menopause at midnight. Either you're very dedicated to learning, or you had a hot flash an hour ago and you're lying here in the dark waiting for your heart rate to come down and you thought, yes, let's hear about the worst possible historical version of this. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. You wake at 3 a.m. You don't ease out of sleep the way you used to. You don't surface slowly the way the children used to when they were small. That gentle rising through layers of warmth until the world came back into focus. No, you ignite. One moment nothing, and then heat. A wall of it, starting somewhere at the center of your chest and radiating outwards simultaneously, up your neck, across your face, down both arms. Your skin prickles as if every single nerve ending has just remembered it exists. Your heart is doing something wrong. Not painful exactly, but urgent, rapid, like it received a message it doesn't know how to process. You are awake, your eyes open to darkness. The bedroom is perfectly black. The curtains are heavy, good thick wool. The same ones you chose 12 years ago when you and Charles moved into this house on Wyndham Street. They block everything. Even on midsummer evenings when it stays light until 9, the room goes completely dark within minutes of those curtains being drawn. Tonight, they're doing their job. Outside, somewhere, a horse is moving on the cobblestones. A single horse, unhurried. The sound travels in the cold October air with a strange clarity that only happens in the middle of the night, when there's nothing else to compete with it. You lie still for a moment. Your nightgown is wet, not damp, wet. The thin cotton that your sister embroidered at the neckline, pale blue flowers, the stitching slightly uneven because she was doing it by feel toward the end of the evening, is soaked through from collar to knee. It clings to your back, your stomach, the backs of your thighs. The sheets beneath you are the same. You have done this enough times now, 6 months, maybe 7. You've stopped counting exactly, that you know the sequence. First comes the heat, then the sweating. Then, as the sweat starts to cool, comes the shivering. Because now you are wet and the room is cold and the fire you banked so carefully before bed has burned down to nothing, and there is no comfortable place for your body to be. Too hot, then cold, then neither. You push yourself to sit in, slowly, because moving too fast sometimes makes the pounding in your chest worse. The sheets make a soft, unpleasant sound as they pull away from your skin. Beside you, Charles breathes in the slow, deep rhythm of a man who has not been woken by anything. His back is to you. The sheet rises and falls with his breathing. You sit on the edge of the bed and wait. This is what you do now. You wait. You've learned there's no point fighting it. Lying back down in wet sheets while the heat rolls through you just makes everything worse. Better to sit. Better to be still, to let the wave pass the way waves do, in its own time, regardless of whether you're ready for it. The room smells of the candle wax you extinguish before bed. Cold candle wax and the slight mustiness of the curtains, and now, underneath both of those, the faint salt smell of your own sweat. Your face is still flushed. You can feel it without touching it. The surface of your skin several degrees warmer than the air, the particular pressure of blood close to the surface that means you would look, if anyone could see you, like a woman who has just run up a flight of stairs. You have not run up a flight of stairs. You've been asleep. You feel for your wrapper on the chair beside the bed. Your fingers find it. Wool, slightly rough against your palm. And you pull it on without standing up, just to have something over the wet nightgown. The wool catches on the damp cotton and you have to work it down over your shoulders. There's a glass of water on the nightstand. You reach for it in the dark, find the cool glass with your fingertips, drink about half of it. The water is cold and slightly stale from sitting all night, and it is the best thing you have tasted in recent memory. You stand. The floorboards are cold through your stockings. You've started sleeping in your stockings because the nights have become unpredictable, and bare feet on cold floors at 3 a.m. seem like one discomfort too many. You move around the bed carefully, muscle memory carrying you past the dressing table. past the wardrobe to the window. You don't open the curtain. Charles is a light sleeper when he's actually woken, and the sound of curtain rings would be enough. Instead, you stand beside the window and feel the cold radiating off the glass, off the thin gap between curtain and frame, and it helps. The cold helps. This is the thing they don't explain to you. Not the books your doctor gave you. 2 slim volumes, both written by men, both using terms so obscure you had to read each sentence twice to understand it wasn't actually written in a foreign language. Not your mother, who said only that these things pass, in a tone that suggested the conversation was over. Not your friends, the ones you meet twice a week for the afternoon, the ones you've known for 15 years. Not one of them has said the word. Not one of them has described this. The 3 o'clock waking, the soaked sheets, the way your heart makes that wrong sound sometimes, like a clock that's slipped a gear. What you've discovered on your own, through trial and error and the particular education of suffering. Cold is the only thing that helps. Cold water, cold air, standing next to a cold window in the dark while your husband sleeps, and the horse's hooves fade into the distance. That's it. That's the treatment. The real one. Everything else is theatre. By 4 o'clock you've given up on sleep and dressed yourself in the dark. This is a skill you've developed over the past 7 months that would have seemed impossible before. Victorian women's clothing is not designed for independent dressing. The back buttons, the hooks and eyes, the lacing that requires a second pair of hands. It's all deliberately constructed to require assistance, to require a maid or a husband or someone. But the maid doesn't come until 6. Charles doesn't wake until 7. And you've been lying in damp sheets staring at the ceiling since 3 o'clock, and you've learned that lying there produces nothing useful except a peculiar kind of time that stretches and warps and deposits you at dawn, feeling worse than if you'd simply gotten up. So you dress yourself. The front fastening dress first. You have 3 of them now. Day dresses altered or purchased specifically for this. Your seamstress, Mrs. Hartley, asked no questions when you brought in the first dress, and asked to have the back fastenings moved to the front. She just looked at you once steadily, and then began unpicking stitches. You've wondered sometimes what she understood. Whether she knew. Whether she herself had gone through this and simply had the sense not to comment on another woman's private necessities. You do up the buttons by feel, working from the waist upward. The wool is navy, thick enough to be warm without being heavy. Your fingers are slightly stiff. They're always stiff in the morning now, especially in cold weather, a new thing from this year. The joints aching until they've been used for a while. You flex each hand twice before starting the buttons. It helps. The corset is next. You stand in front of the dark mirror. You can see yourself only as a shape, and lace the corset from the front the way you've learned to do it. Not as tight as Agnes would lace it when she helped you dress. Tight enough for the silhouette. Loose enough for the days when the heat comes and you need to breathe. This is the calculation you make every morning now. How tight can I lace this and still survive the afternoon? In the early months, before you understood what was happening, you kept to your usual corset, the usual tightness, the usual silhouette. And the heat would hit in the middle of the afternoon, at dinner with guests, at a committee meeting, at the post office of all places, and suddenly you were unable to breathe properly. The corset compressing exactly the wrong way at exactly the wrong moment, your face burning while you sat very still and tried to look like a woman who was simply warm, and not a woman who felt like she was standing in front of an open furnace. You've learned. The compromise you've reached with your own body involves front lacing slightly looser than fashionable, and a very good carriage with the shoulders back to compensate. You've watched yourself in the mirror enough times now to believe it works, mostly. Your hair you can do in the dark. 20 years of practice. Brush, pin, twist, secure. The grey is coming in at your temples. It's been coming for 3 years, though it accelerated this year, a new silver appearing weekly that you've noticed without comment. Your hair was the colour of dark honey when you married Charles. It's something more complicated now. You add the pins by feel. 1, 2, 3, secure, you're dressed. The clock on the mantelpiece says 4:20. You go downstairs. The kitchen is the warmest room in the house at this hour. The range, a Leamington range, cast iron, the pride of Mrs. Granger the cook, who has opinions about ranges that she'll share at length if encouraged and sometimes if not, holds heat through the night, even when the fire is banked. The kitchen smells of yesterday's bread and the faint iron smell of the range itself, and, underneath both, the particular smell of a room that's used constantly. Cooking fat and onion skins and the soap that's used to clean the stone floor. You stand at the range and warm your hands. Your hands are the thing you notice most lately. They've always been useful hands. Not beautiful, not the long-fingered delicate hands that women in portraits seem to have, but useful. You can cut fabric straight without a ruler. You can judge the quality of cloth by feeling it. You can calculate household accounts faster than Charles can, though you've always done this quietly, presenting the numbers when you're done rather than making the process visible. Lately they ache, not constantly, not so badly you can't use them. But in the mornings especially there's a stiffness in the knuckles that weren't there before, and sometimes a deep dull ache in the thumb joints that you feel when you're gripping something. A pen, a door handle, the edge of a heavy pot. It comes and goes without pattern. Some days you don't notice it at all. Other days by evening you find yourself holding your hand still in your lap rather than continue the work that causes it. Nobody told you this was part of it. You're still not entirely sure it is. The books mentioned joint complaints, in passing, the way they mentioned everything, obliquely, vaguely, as if being specific might cause harm. Some ladies experience discomforts of the joints. Some ladies, as if you are a category rather than a person. You fill the kettle from the pitcher. The servants will have fresh water in the scullery, but you don't want to wake anyone, so you use what's there, and set it on the hottest part of the range. While you wait, you sit at the kitchen table. The kitchen table is not where you usually sit. There's a perfectly good morning room on the first floor where you take breakfast. But the morning room is cold at this hour, and the kitchen is warm, and at 4:25 in the morning there's no one to see you sitting at the servants' table like you belong there. You sit. Your back is straight, even without an audience. 25 years of correct posture doesn't simply turn off when nobody's watching. You sit with your hands folded on the table and look at the wall and think about nothing in particular, which has become a skill you didn't have before. Before this year, before the first hot flash woke you at 3 a.m. in June and sent you lurching to the window convinced the house was on fire, you were not a woman who sat and thought about nothing. You were a woman in motion. There was always a list, always something to be managed, resolved, organised, set in order. The children's schedules, the household accounts, the committee for the church bazaar, the dinners to plan, the calls to make and return. Now, sometimes, you sit. You're not sure if this is surrender or wisdom. You've been turning the question over for months and you still don't know. The kettle begins its low moan before boiling. You listen to it. Outside, a bird, just one, probably a thrush. Tests a few notes. Stops. Tests a few more. It's the first bird. They always begin before the light, as if they're practicing in the dark. The kettle sings louder. You make your tea. You don't go to see Dr. Hartley until October, which means you've been managing this on your own since March. 7 months of waking at 3. 7 months of soaked sheets and front-laced corsets and standing at cold windows. 7 months of a face that turns red at the wrong moments and a heart that occasionally hammers for reasons you cannot explain. Charles noticed in July. "Are you quite well, Eleanor?" he said at dinner, looking at you across the soup course with an expression you couldn't entirely read. He's not a man who talks about physical things. You've been married to him for 22 years, and in that time he has mentioned his own body only when it was causing him significant enough inconvenience to require a doctor's appointment, and even then he does so with a certain amount of visible discomfort. "Perfectly well," you said. "Eat your soup before it cools." He ate his soup. You ate yours. But he kept looking at you, and you knew. You've known him for 22 years. You know every version of his face. That he had noticed something. The way you opened the window during dinner even though the August evening was already cool enough. The way you sometimes went still and distant for a moment before resuming conversation. The slight unevenness in your colour. He didn't ask again. You didn't explain. And maybe that was the wrong choice. You've thought about this. In the small hours sitting in the kitchen with your tea, you've turned it over. Maybe if you'd simply said to him, "Charles, I think this is the change of life. I believe it'll take some time and then it will be over." Maybe he would have said, "I see. Is there anything I can do?" And maybe that would have been enough, but you didn't say it. Because the words themselves felt like a kind of small death. Because there's something in the phrase, change of life, that sounds like an ending. Like you're announcing the closure of something. The closing of a chapter that includes your 22-year marriage and the person you've been inside it. And you weren't ready to announce that to anyone. So you went to Dr. Hartley in October instead, on a Tuesday, between your morning calls and your afternoon committee, as if it were a routine appointment for a routine matter. Dr. Hartley's consulting room is on Harley Street. Of course it's on Harley Street. Every respectable physician of any standing in London has rooms on Harley Street, or within 3 streets of it. Dr. Hartley is on the respectable end, which means his waiting room has good chairs and last month's Illustrated London News, and a housemaid who offers tea without being asked. You know this waiting room. You've brought the children here. You've sat in this exact chair, the one by the window, slightly removed from the other chairs, the one that gives you something to look at, waiting while the children were examined. Eliza's chest 2 winters ago. George's ankle the spring before that. You've never sat in it for yourself. The other woman in the waiting room is perhaps 50, well-dressed, reading the Illustrated London News with the concentrated focus of someone who is not actually reading it. She doesn't look up when you come in. You don't look at her. This is the etiquette. You are here for private reasons. She is here for private reasons. Whatever those reasons are, they belong to each of you, and not to each other. But you notice, sitting across from her, that she holds her reticule in a slightly unusual way, clasped in both hands rather than set on her lap, and that there's a faint sheen at her hairline that has nothing to do with the moderate temperature of the room. You don't say anything. She doesn't either. You read 3 pages of the Illustrated London News without remembering a word of it. Dr. Hartley's a tall man, slightly stooped in the way that very tall men sometimes become, as if they've been apologizing for their height since childhood. He has a neat grey beard and the careful, slightly remote manner of a man who has spent 30 years listening to people describe things they're embarrassed about and has trained himself not to react. He is not unkind. You've always thought that about him. He is not unkind, but he is also not warm. He occupies a careful, professional middle ground where he can be competent and correct without being involved. "Mrs. Marsh," he says, "how can I help you today?" And you tell him. Not all of it. You couldn't tell all of it. There aren't quite the words, in the language you've been given for your own body, to describe what these 7 months have been. But you tell him enough. The waking at 3, the heat that comes in waves, the sweating, the pounding in the chest that frightens you. He listens, he makes a note, he asks a few questions. How long, how often, how severe, and he writes down your answers. His pen makes a dry scratching sound on the paper. Then he puts down his pen. He folds his hands on the desk. He looks at you over his spectacles with the practiced expression of a man about to deliver information he's delivered many times before. "Madam," he says, "you're entering the climacteric." A pause. You're no longer, in the physiological sense, a woman. The room is very quiet. You hear the pen on his desk, the faint sound of traffic from Harley Street, your own breathing, which is steady, which you're concentrating on keeping steady, because the alternative is to let whatever is rising in your chest actually reach your face. You're 45 years old. You raised 2 children. You ran a household. You managed, year after year, the 1,000 invisible calculations that keep a life functioning. The food, the heat, the cleaning, the accounts, the social obligations, the emotional maintenance of everyone in your orbit. You did this while also being decorative and compliant and charming, and everything else that was required of you, all simultaneously, without complaint, because complaint was not available to you. And now a man with a beard is telling you that, in the physiological sense, you are no longer a woman. "I see," you say. Your voice is perfectly level. You've spent 22 years perfecting that particular tone. Polite, composed, giving nothing away. "What I would recommend," Dr. Hartley continues, "is a program of rest and regulated living. The climacteric is a time of significant physiological stress. The system must be supported carefully as it completes its..." He pauses, searching for the word transition. He reaches for a pad and begins writing. "You should avoid excessive mental exertion. This is of particular importance. The vital forces currently occupied in the reproductive transition must not be diverted to cerebral activity. Reading, correspondence, committee work. Reduce these significantly," he writes. "Gentle exercise only. No strenuous walking. No stairs if they can be avoided," he writes. "I would recommend you speak with your husband about the importance of domestic tranquility during this period. Stress of any kind is contraindicated." He tears the paper from the pad and passes it to you. "I'm prescribing a tincture of valerian with a small preparation of bromide of potassium for the nocturnal disturbances. 2 teaspoons before bed. If the cardiac symptoms persist, the palpitations, return, and we will discuss further measures." He stands. The appointment is apparently over. "Mrs. Marsh," he says, and for just a moment there's something in his voice that might be something close to kindness. "I want to reassure you. This is a natural process. Uncomfortable, yes. Distressing, but natural. Many ladies find that with appropriate rest and management, the worst symptoms pass in..." He makes a small gesture. Some time. You put the prescription in your reticule. You thank him. You put on your gloves, both gloves, left then right, buttons done up with fingers that are completely steady. You make sure of it, and you walk out through the waiting room. The woman with the reticule is still there, still reading the illustrated London news. You don't look at her, and she doesn't look at you. Out on Harley Street, the air hits your face and it's cold and clean, and there's a cab stand 20 yards away, and you walk toward it and you think, no strenuous walking, no stairs if they can be avoided. Reduce your reading and your correspondence and your committee work. Ask your husband to ensure domestic tranquility. You think, I have been managing my own existence without assistance for 45 years, and the prescription is less of it. You get into the cab. You sit with your hands folded and your back straight all the way home. It's only later, much later, at 3 a.m, sitting in the kitchen with your tea, listening to the range tick and settle in the dark, that you let yourself be angry about it. The tincture of valerian and bromide of potassium tastes like muddy water, mixed with something sweet gone wrong. You take it dutifully for 3 weeks, 2 teaspoons before bed, the way Dr. Hartley prescribed. You measure it carefully with the small silver spoon you keep beside the bottle. You take it with half a glass of water. You go to bed at a reasonable hour. It doesn't stop the waking. It makes the waking slightly slower, slightly thicker. You surface from sleep as if pushing through something viscous rather than igniting all at once. But you still wake. The heat still comes. The sheets are still wet. What the bromide does do is make you feel, in the morning, as if someone has packed the inside of your skull with damp wool, a heaviness that lifts slowly over the first 2 hours of the day and returns with renewed enthusiasm after the afternoon. You stop taking it after 3 weeks. You don't tell Dr. Hartley. You tell yourself you'll mention it at the next appointment, which you schedule and then reschedule and then eventually let lapse, because you cannot face sitting in that chair again and being told to think less. Instead, you begin doing what women have always done, which is share information laterally and unofficially, and in the spaces between the things you are officially supposed to be talking about. The first useful piece of information comes from your friend Margaret in November, over tea. Margaret is 47. She has 3 children and a husband who works at the Board of Trade, and opinions about everything, delivered with the certainty that would be exhausting if you didn't know her well enough to understand that the certainty is partly performance. Under it, she's a person who worries constantly and hides this behind a voice like an edict. You've been meeting for tea twice a week for 11 years. She's never mentioned it, not once. And you've looked, sometimes, looked at her colour, at the way she sometimes pauses in conversation for just a moment too long, at the glass of cold water she drinks, at unusual speed on certain afternoons. And you've wondered. But neither of you has said the word. Today she says it, not directly, not the way you might simply say, I'm experiencing the change of life, are you? Because that's not how it works. What happens instead is that you're talking about something entirely different, about the difficulty of getting good coal this winter, and Margaret puts down her cup and says, Eleanor, does your face do this? She puts her hand flat on her cheek, the palm against the skin, the way you might feel for a fever on a child. You look at her. The heat, she says, not a question. Coming from nowhere, just suddenly. And something loosens in your chest that you didn't realize you'd been holding tight. Yes, you say. Just that. Just yes. And Margaret lets out a breath like she's been holding it since March. I thought I was dying, she says. The first time. I genuinely thought my heart was... I know. And the sweating. I know. And nobody... I know. You sit there together for a moment, both of you slightly ridiculous. 2 40-something women in a very nicely furnished parlour on a Tuesday afternoon in November, looking at each other across the wreckage of a mutual secrecy that lasted much longer than it needed to. How long, you ask? Since April, she says. You? March. Another pause. Did you go to the doctor? Whitmore, she says. Dr. Whitmore is on Queen Anne Street. He told me to rest and take cold baths. Cold baths. Every morning, before breakfast, you stare at her. In November? He assured me the hydrotherapy would settle the nervous system. Her voice has taken on a particular dry quality that you recognize from moments when she is trying not to say something she actually very much wants to say. He also recommended that I take my meals in silence and avoid novels. Dr. Hartley told me to reduce my mental exertion. Margaret's expression does something complicated. Between us, she says carefully, I have found that cold water actually does help. Yes, you say. I stand by the window. I've been getting up at 4 and going to the kitchen, she says. I make tea. I sit at the kitchen table, she says, and read novels. You look at each other. Well, you say, that's very bad for your nervous system. Apparently, says Margaret, but it is very good for everything else. You start to laugh, both of you, slightly too hard, the kind of laughter that's been compressed for a long time and is now finding its way out at an inconvenient moment. The parlourmaid pokes her head around the door, attracted probably by the sound, and then disappears again with a particular discreet speed of a servant who has learned not to see things. When it subsides, you're left feeling not better exactly, but different. Like a room after a window's been opened. The air the same, but moving. What else, you ask, and Margaret tells you. Everything she's worked out by trial and error over 8 months of managing this alone. The foods that make it worse. Port wine, she says categorically. 1 glass will bring on a flush in 20 minutes. The time of day when it's worst. The particular relief of cold air on the face and neck. The almost complete uselessness of everything the doctors prescribed. He wants me to go to Malvern, Margaret says, the water cure. Malvern is a spa town in Worcestershire, famous for its hydropathic establishment. Cold water applied in various ways to various parts of the body, by various attendants for various length of time. It has been fashionable for 20 years. Will you go? You ask. No, says Margaret simply. I have a household to run. Your household. You want to stay in that sentence for a moment, because your household is not a simple thing. It is in fact the engine running beneath everything, like the great cast-iron Leamington range in the kitchen, heating everything around it by virtue of its constant operation. The house on Wyndham Street has 8 rooms on 3 floors, plus the basement kitchen and scullery, plus the attic rooms where the servants sleep. It runs on a staff of 4. Agnes the housemaid, Mrs. Granger the cook, the girl who comes in on Mondays and Thursdays to do the heavy cleaning, and a boy called James who does the boots and the coal and runs errands. You manage all of this, not Charles. Charles contributes the money that funds it, and for that you're genuinely grateful, because money is not nothing, and the lack of it changes everything. But the actual running, the organisation, the decisions, the daily 1,000 adjustments that keep the mechanism functioning, that's yours. The weekly menus, the household accounts, the linen that needs replacing, the coal bills that need checking because coal merchants have a tendency to round upward, and you have a tendency to notice. The organisation of the children's schedules. Eliza is 19 now and mostly self-managing but still requires guidance. And George is 17 and entirely the opposite, requiring the kind of management that looks like casual conversation but is actually tactical. The calls you need to make and return, the charity committee, the church, the various social requirements of being married to a man in Charles's position. You do all of this on 7 months of interrupted sleep, in a body that runs a fever at random intervals and aches in the joints every morning, in a corset you've had to modify because the original version is now incompatible with staying conscious. Reduce mental exertion, said Dr. Hartley. Right. There's a morning in December that you don't talk about afterward. Not to Margaret, not to anyone. You keep it private because it frightens you slightly, and you're not yet sure what to do with it. It's a Wednesday. The week before Christmas, which means the house is in full Christmas preparation mode. The greenery, the pudding that Mrs. Granger has been making and feeding with brandy since October, the cards, the gifts, the various plans. The house smells of pine resin and cold air, and the brandy-soaked pudding whenever anyone goes near the larder. You're standing in the morning room. You came in here to write 3 letters, a note to your sister in Bath, a response to Margaret about the committee meeting in January, a brief acknowledgement to the vicar about the Christmas arrangements. 3 short letters, nothing complicated. You sit down at the writing desk, you pick up the pen, you dip it, and then you sit there. Just sit there, the pen in your hand, the paper in front of you, the ink beginning to dry on the nib. You sit there and you cannot make yourself begin. Not because you don't know what to say. You know exactly what to say. The words are there, organised and ready, the way they always are. What isn't there is the momentum, the forward motion, the thing that normally carries you from thought to action without a perceptible gap. It's gone. You put the pen down. You sit with your hands in your lap and look at the paper and think, is this what they mean? Is this the mental disturbance they talk about in their careful books? Is this the beginning of the dissolution they all predicted? And then, underneath that, the thought you're ashamed of. What if they're right? What if this is what happens? What if this is the transition from whatever you've been into whatever comes next? A quieter version, a lesser version. A woman who sits at her writing desk and cannot write 3 letters. You sit there for about 15 minutes. Then you pick up the pen. You write all 3 letters. You write them quickly, without stopping, slightly shorter than you would normally, but correct in tone and complete in content. You blot them. You seal them. You put them in the tray for James to take out. Then you sit back. Your hands are shaking slightly, just slightly, from nothing, from the effort of having written 3 letters, which is something you would normally do in 15 minutes without noticing. This is what nobody tells you about this year. It isn't one thing. It's not just the hot flashes, not just the sleepless nights. It's this, the variable capacity. The days when you're entirely yourself, when the body cooperates and the mind is clear, and you move through the household with the same organised competence you've had for 20 years. And then the days when everything costs twice as much and you're not sure why, and there's nothing to point to, nothing specific, nothing you could explain to Dr. Hartley or to Charles or to anyone who might ask. The body has become not quite yours, not exactly, not foreign either, something in between, something you have to negotiate with rather than simply occupy. You take the poker and stir the fire, watch the coals shift and glow. Then You get up and go do the next thing. The apothecary is on the corner of Aldgate and Houndsditch. Not the sort of place you'd usually patronise. It's slightly east of where you usually go. Slightly less refined than the pharmacy on Wigmore Street that you've used for years. But Margaret mentioned it, in the oblique way she mentions things when she wants you to know something, without actually appearing to be the person who told you. There's a man on Aldgate, she said, who knows an enormous amount about botanical preparations. A friend of mine found his compound for female difficulties entirely useful when the standard prescriptions proved inadequate. Female difficulties. The phrase covers an extraordinary range of human experience when you're a Victorian woman. You go on a Thursday afternoon in January walking the 20 minutes rather than taking a cab because the cold air is useful to you now in a way it never was before. The fog is heavy. It's been heavy for 4 days, this particular January fog. The kind that sits so low and thick that buildings dissolve into it at the top, and the smell of coal smoke is laid over everything like a second skin. It's the smell of London in winter, coal smoke and fog, and under it the particular damp smell of a city sitting on a river. Your face is cold. Your hands in their Goodwill gloves are cold, but not painfully so. The movement keeps you warm enough, and the cold stops the afternoon flush that's been predictable enough lately that you've begun timing your errands around it. Aldgate is busier than Wyndham Street. The mix of people is different. More working men, more street vendors, more noise. A cart pushes past, the horse enormous and patient, its breath steaming in the cold air. Nobody looks at you particularly, which is both a relief and its own kind of strangeness. On your own street you know everyone. You've been a recognisable figure for 12 years. Here you're just a woman in a navy coat walking east. The apothecary is easy to find. The window display is careful. Neat rows of brown bottles, a few packages, some dried herbs in glass containers that catch even the grey January light. The sign above the door says Charles Martin, chemist and druggist in gold letters on a black ground. The bell above the door rings when you push it open. Inside, the smell is extraordinary, not unpleasant. Actually, specifically not unpleasant, which is surprising if you think about what's stored in this room. It's layered and complex. The top note is something herbal, green and slightly medicinal, what you later identify as dried peppermint. Underneath that, something heavier and sweeter. Valerian, probably. Similar to, but not quite the same as what was in the bottle from Dr. Hartley. And underneath all of that, the base note of the room itself, which is wood and dust and the faint clean sharpness of alcohol used as a preservative. Shelves line every wall from floor to ceiling. Brown bottles, white bottles, blue glass bottles, drawers with hand-lettered labels. You can read a few from where you're standing. Lavender, chamomile, gentian root, ergot of rye. You know what ergot of rye is now. You looked it up after Dr. Hartley mentioned it. The information did not reassure you. The man behind the counter looks up. He's perhaps 60, with a neat white beard and the kind of face that manages to be both attentive and professionally neutral at the same time. His hands, he was doing something with a mortar and pestle when you came in, are the hands of a man who's worked with small, precise objects his entire life. Clean, careful. The apron he wears is spotless, which in this London fog is a significant achievement. "Good afternoon," he says. "Good afternoon." You take a breath. You've rehearsed this in your head on the walk over. How to say it without being excessive, without dramatising. A friend recommended you. She said you had a compound that was helpful for the change of life, the climacteric. You say both words clearly. No euphemism. Say what you mean. He doesn't blink. He doesn't react with anything except a small nod that says, "This is something I'm familiar with." "Sit down, madam," he says, gesturing to a chair beside the counter. "You sit. Tell me what you're experiencing. Be specific if you can. The more precisely I understand the pattern, the more useful the preparation I can put together." And so you tell him. All of it this time. Not edited, not managed, not delivered in the carefully neutral tone you used with Dr. Hartley. The 3 o'clock waking, the heat that comes in waves and the sweating that follows, the way the heart does that wrong thing sometimes. The joint stiffness in the morning, the afternoon flush that can be predicted like the tide, the days when your capacity varies and you can't explain why. He listens. He asks questions. Direct, clinical, occasionally surprising. Does the heat start in a particular location? The chest, you say. How long does a flush typically last? 3 minutes? Perhaps 5. Are there triggers you've identified? Port wine, you say, thinking of Margaret. Possibly heat, stress. He makes notes on a small card in a rapid, compressed hand. The valerian and bromide, he says, when you mention Dr. Hartley's prescription. Useful for some. The bromide in particular is good for the nervous aspect, the anxiety, the palpitations, but it flattens everything, and for many women the side effects outweigh the benefit. That's exactly what I found, you say. He nods, still writing. What I would suggest, he says, and he pulls a small wooden box from behind the counter, opens it, shows you the row of brown bottles inside, is a compound based on black cohosh root. It's American, native to North America, but it's been used for exactly this purpose for a considerable time, and the evidence, such as it is fairly compelling. I'll combine it with some valerian at much lower concentration than what you've been given, and with passion flower for the sleep. He looks up. The passion flower is gentler than the bromide. It won't leave you thick-headed in the morning. The bromide felt like... Yes, he says simply. It does. He begins measuring. His movements are precise and economical, each motion the result of long practice. The scales he uses are small and delicate, with weights that look like they could be jewellery. He measures something from a brown bottle, dark, slightly viscous, adds it to a base compound, measures again. May I ask, you say, whether this is well established? The black cohosh? He glances up briefly. It's been used by indigenous women in North America for centuries. It's been used at the country for perhaps 30 years. There are no formal trials, if that's what you're asking. Victorian medicine doesn't conduct formal trials on women's symptoms. He says this without inflection, just states it. What there is, he says, returning to his measuring, is 30 years of women coming into apothecary shops and telling me what works and what doesn't. I find that a reasonable body of evidence. You watch him work. How many, you ask? How many women have you seen for this specific complaint? He considers, the pestle resting in the mortar. In 30 years of practice, several hundred. A pause. Possibly more. I've stopped counting. Several hundred women. All of them sitting in this chair or chairs like it in whatever shop came before. All of them describing the same 3 o'clock waking, the same heat, the same soaked sheets and hammering heart. Why does nobody talk about it, you ask? You mean it genuinely. It's the question you've been carrying for 7 months. He looks at you for a moment. Because it involves the reproductive organs, he says. In this century, in this country, that subject is entirely off limits in polite society. which means that generations of women suffer it in silence and ignorance and conclude that they are uniquely unfortunate or uniquely ill, or in some cases, he pauses, that they are in some way being punished for something. A pause. Are they? Punished for something? No, he says. They're having menopause. He says it so flatly, so plainly, as if it's the simplest thing in the world, which it is. It is the simplest thing in the world, that you feel something crack slightly in your chest. He wraps the compound in brown paper, writes the instructions on a label in his neat hand. 2 drops in water, morning and evening, not 2 teaspoons, 2 drops. If you don't notice improvement in 4 weeks, come back and we'll adjust the compound. If you do notice improvement, keep taking it. Come back in 3 months regardless. You pay him, less than you expected. At the door you pause, turn back. Thank you, you say. And you mean it so specifically, so precisely. Not the social thank you of someone who's just completed a transaction, but something heavier and more particular, that he seems to understand. He nods. Good luck, madam, he says. And then, with the corner of something that might be a smile in his precise face, it does end, you know. It is finite. That much I can promise you. You step back out into the Aldgate fog. A dinner party. December, before Christmas, at the Hargreaves on Cavendish Square. You've known the Hargreaves, Robert and Charlotte, for 15 years. They have the largest dining room of anyone in your circle, and therefore host more often than anyone else, which means twice a year you sit at their table with 12 other people and eat a dinner of 5 courses and talk about things that everyone present has already decided to agree about. You would not normally dread this. You dread this. You've been dreading it for a week. You've been planning it. The way you've been planning everything since July, around the likelihood of a flush at an inopportune moment. You've selected the dress with care. Silk, yes, but a silk that breathes slightly better than the satin you'd normally choose, and a neckline high enough to be proper and low enough that if the heat comes to your face, you can at least feel air on your throat. You've laced the corset looser than you normally would for evening. You've planned your port wine strategy. Decline it. Charles will give you a slightly puzzled look because you usually take a glass, but 1 glass of port will bring on a flush within 20 minutes, which is exactly the length of time before dinner when the port is served, which would put you at the dinner table, under Charlotte's excellent chandelier in front of 12 people, at the peak of the flush. So, no port. You've also brought a small bottle of the apothecary's compound in your reticule, just in case. 2 drops in water. You have no idea whether you'd actually be able to use it. The logistics of taking drops from a bottle in the middle of a dinner party without anyone noticing are not entirely clear, but having it there is its own particular comfort. The knowledge that there's something you can do. The carriage ride to Cavendish Square is cold, and the cold is welcome. Your hands in your gloves. Charles beside you, reading something. He brings papers to evening engagements, reads them in the carriage, puts them away when you arrive, as if the transition from work to social is simply a matter of changing what's in his hands. You look well, he says without looking up. Thank you. New dress. Old dress. Different trim. He nods and returns to his papers. This is Charles. Comfortable Charles, whom you've known for 22 years. You find at the moment that his uncomplicated observation, you look well, is both touching and slightly infuriating. You look well. You've been awake since 3 o'clock. You're wearing a modified corset and a breathable silk, and you have a bottle of drops in your reticule as insurance against your own body publicly betraying you. You look well. Thank you, you say again, and mean it more than before. The Hargreaves' drawing room is warm. Too warm because Charlotte Hargreaves keeps her fires built high. The chandelier above throws good light on everything. On the people, on the furniture, on the wallpaper. There are 12 guests, all of them comfortable with each other and capable of carrying on 6 simultaneous conversations, occasionally intersecting. You move through the room. You greet Charlotte, you greet Robert, you greet the Ashtons and the Mortimers and Lord and Lady Felton and the Davises. You say the correct things. You ask the correct questions. You receive and give the correct responses, and you are entirely a functioning social being managing a drawing room of 12 people with the ease of 20 years of practice. And then, just before dinner is announced, in the middle of a conversation about the new park development in Kensington that you're having with Peter Ashton, it comes. Just the heat first, the chest, the neck. You do not change expression. This is the thing they should know. The doctors, the writers of the slim medical volumes, Dr. Hartley with his bromide of potassium. This is what it actually costs. Not the flush itself, which is merely uncomfortable. The cost is the effort of concealing it. The effort of continuing to say, yes, the park development does seem rather, while your face is doing something you can't control, and you can feel the warmth rising up your neck, and you have to estimate in the back of your mind whether the colour is going to reach your face visibly, and whether Peter Ashton is looking at you, and whether Charlotte across the room has noticed, and whether the logical move is to excuse yourself, or whether moving will make it worse. You decide to continue. I think the question of the ornamental lake is genuinely complicated, you say, and your voice is level and appropriate, and Peter Ashton is nodding, and you're standing in the warmth of the Hargreaves' drawing room, with a face that you're hoping looks like the normal colour of a woman who's been in a warm room. It lasts 4 minutes. You count. At 4 minutes, it subsides. The wave passes. Your face returns to its normal temperature. Peter Ashton, who has a theory about ornamental lakes and has been outlining it without pause, apparently notices nothing. Dinner is served, says the butler. You go into dinner. The dinner itself is fine. Charlotte's cook is talented, and the table is dressed well, and the conversation distributed among 12 people stays at a manageable level of interesting. You sit between Lord Felton, who is 70 and tells the same 3 stories he always tells, but tells them with great energy and charm, and young Dr. Carter, who is Robert Hargreaves' nephew, a new physician, perhaps 32, who's recently set up practice in Bloomsbury. You talk to Lord Felton through the soup and the fish. You listen to his 3 stories with genuine interest in their delivery, if not their content. Then you turn to Dr. Carter. He's earnest. That's the first thing you notice. He's the kind of young man who hasn't yet developed the professional carapace that physicians like Dr. Hartley have. He still looks at people with something close to actual attention. He asks you about yourself with real curiosity rather than social form. You talk about his practice in Bloomsbury. You talk about the new hospital building near Paddington. You talk cautiously about some recent articles on women's health that you've been reading. You've been reading medical journals, which is what happens when your doctor tells you to reduce your reading and you decide to redirect it. And you watch his face for the reaction. He listens. You've been reading Tilt, he says, when you mention one of the authors. His book on the change of life, you say. Yes. He's not entirely wrong on the physiology, Dr. Carter says thoughtfully. though his prescriptions are... He stops. Conservative, you offer. I was going to say, not particularly evidence-based. The cold baths? The cold baths, he confirms, with the slight expression of a man trying not to show what he actually thinks of the cold baths. And the rest cure? He puts down his fork. He looks at you. Really looks at you. With the particular attention of someone who's been listening carefully enough to realise that this conversation is not entirely theoretical. Are you... He begins carefully. Yes, you say. Since March. A brief pause. The table around you continues its 12-person roar. Lord Felton is telling his third story to the person on his other side. Then you know better than I do what works and what doesn't, Dr. Carter says. You look at him. I have some ideas on that, yes, you say. The cold baths, he asks. I stand at a cold window at 3 a.m, you say. Same principle, rather more practical. Something shifts in his expression. Something that looks less like professional interest and more like respect. A specific kind of respect for a specific thing. The competence of someone who has been managing a complex problem without adequate tools and has developed their own methodology. There's some work coming out of France on the endocrine system, he says. Speculative, still speculative. But the theory is that what we currently call the climacteric may be a hormonal transition rather than a systemic failure. Which would mean the treatments that currently make it worse by restricting function might be exactly backwards, you say. He blinks. Yes, exactly. Lord Felton finishes his story. The table adjusts. The soup plates are cleared. I'm in practice in Bloomsbury, Dr. Carter says. Mostly women and children at present. If you are interested in a consultation, or simply in talking to someone who is trying to think about this differently. You look at him. He's 32 and earnest and clearly not yet in full possession of the armour that will eventually make him like Dr. Hartley, which means there's a narrow window in which he's actually useful. I'll think about it, you say. The next course arrives. January. You've been taking the black cohosh compound from the Aldgate apothecary for 6 weeks. You cannot be certain. You've told yourself every week that you're not going to decide yet, that you need more data, but the 3 o'clock wakings are fewer. Not gone, but fewer. Where before you were waking every night, some nights you sleep until 4, occasionally until 5. The heat still comes, but it passes slightly faster, or perhaps you're simply better at managing it, or both. The joint stiffness in the mornings is about the same. The afternoon flush, the one that correlates you've now established fairly certainly, with warmth and stress and the passage of 2 hours since your last drink of water, that's slightly more predictable. Which means slightly more manageable. It's not a cure, it's an adjustment, a slight tilting of the balance. But slight tilting of the balance, you are discovering, is not nothing. After 7 months of everything being slightly more difficult than it needed to be, slight improvement is its own form of relief. You've started keeping a small notebook, not a diary. Nothing so expansive or emotionally ambitious as a diary. Just a small grey notebook kept in the drawer of your writing desk where you record data. The pattern of the nights, what helps, what doesn't. The foods you've identified as triggers, the small discoveries, that a glass of cold water immediately when you wake can shorten the duration. That lying flat makes it worse. Sitting makes it better. That the stiffness in your hands is worse when you had a cold night, but better when you've moved them steadily for the first hour of the day. Patterns. Patterns mean you can predict, and prediction means you can prepare. And preparation means you're not just enduring, you're thinking. Charles, who's found you sitting at your writing desk at unusual hours on several occasions now, finally asks in February what you're doing. Records, you say? Of what? You look at him across the bedroom. He's just come up from his study, still in his evening coat. Late, the way he gets late in the autumn and winter. You look at him and you think, 22 years. This man has known you for 22 years, and you have been carrying this alone for almost a year. Come sit down, you say. He comes and sits on the edge of the bed. He looks at you with the expression of a man who is slightly afraid of what's going to be said next, because men in his position are often slightly afraid of things their wives say after, "Come sit down." And you tell him, not all of it. Not the doctor's appointment and the insult of no longer a woman. Not the full 7 months of solitary 3 o'clock management. But enough. The sleep disruption. The heat. The cold window at 4 a.m. The apothecary in Aldgate. He listens. His face goes through several things. The slight alarm you expected. A confusion that looks genuine. And then something that resolves into a look you've seen before. In 22 years of marriage, that means he is less sure what to say than he would like to appear. Why didn't you tell me? He asks. This is the question. This is the question that has 100 answers, none of them the simple kind. Because, you say carefully, I didn't know how, and because I think I needed to understand it myself first. He's quiet for a moment. Is there anything I can do? You look at him. The earnestness of the question. The particular helplessness of a man who is very good at certain kinds of problems and is now presented with one that has no clear solution and no role for him to play. Keep the bedroom window cracked at night, you say. Even in winter, just an inch. The bedroom window? Yes. He thinks about this. I'll be cold. I know. I'm sorry. He looks at you. He has a good face, Charles. A reliable face. The face of a man who at 22 years is as familiar to you as your own hands. I'll get an extra blanket, he says, and that's all. But the window stays cracked for the rest of the winter, every night. And it is a small and very specific act of love that you don't particularly have words for. March, a year since it started. You're sitting in the kitchen at 4 a.m, a Tuesday, a cold, bright night, the kind where the cold comes through the window gap clean and without the fog of winter, just clear cold, and you're thinking about the woman you were in February of last year. She didn't know any of this was coming. She was a woman who slept through the night and dressed without thinking about it, and sat at her writing desk without having to take a breath first. She managed the household with ease and called on the committee and went to dinner parties without a bottle of drops in her reticule. She existed in her body the way most people exist in their bodies when everything's working normally, which is to say, she barely thought about it. You think about your body constantly now. This is the strangest thing. The thing you couldn't have predicted. You used to move through your days without reference to the physical. Now you're in continuous low-level negotiation. Water intake, temperature, timing, energy levels, the state of your hands, the status of your sleep. You know more about the operations of your own physiology than you've learned in 45 years of previous existence. Is that a loss? It feels like both. An enormous loss of the unconscious ease, the taking for granted, and simultaneously something that functions like knowledge. A map of a country you never knew you were living in. Your sister writes from Bath. She's 41, 3 years behind you. She mentions in her letter that she's been having headaches. Terrible headaches, she says, completely unpredictable, and her doctor says it's nerves and she should rest. You write back a long letter, longer than she probably expected. You tell her what you've learned, not all of it. But you tell her the headaches might be something. You tell her there are apothecaries who know more than the doctors about this. You tell her, write back and tell me exactly what's happening. You seal the letter. You look at the clock. 4:30. Outside, the first bird has started. A thrush, testing a few notes in the cold dark. Your tea is finished. The range ticks and settles. Through the window gap, the air is moving, carrying the smell of the London morning beginning. Coal smoke, always coal smoke, and under it the faint sweetness of something. Damp earth from the small garden, and the cold river smell from the west. You sit. This is your 4 o'clock self. This woman who sits in the kitchen and knows things and writes long letters to her sister and keeps a small grey notebook and has decided, without quite deciding it formally, that she will not be diminished by this. She will be educated by it. There's a distinction. Spring comes with a particular cruelty, the way London springs always do. A week of warmth and promise, then a reversal to something cold and grey, then warmth again, tentative, as if the city isn't quite sure it has earned it. The light comes back by degrees. The mornings brighten, the evenings lengthen. You start sleeping until 5, not every night. Some nights the old pattern still comes, the 3 o'clock wake, the heat, the window. But more and more often you wake in the grey of early morning rather than the absolute black of the small hours, and this alone is enough to make the days feel different, fuller. The body, when it has had something closer to sleep, is a different instrument. The compound from the Aldgate apothecary has become part of your mornings, 2 drops in water. You've been back twice now, once to ask about the stiffness in your hands, which he supplemented with a ginger preparation that helps, and once because the 3 months were up, as he said they would be. He asked you questions. You answered them. He adjusted the compound slightly. Eliza notices first, which is interesting because Eliza is 19 and has never been the most observant member of the household about things that aren't directly relevant to her own life. But she comes into the morning room one Thursday afternoon and sits down across from you and says, "Mama, you seem better." You look up from your book. "Do I?" "You seem more—" She gestures, trying to find the word. Eliza is very like Charles in this. Good with practical things, less certain with language. "Normal," she says finally. "Normal," you repeat. "I mean that for a while you were—" She stops, tries again. "I don't know. Something was off, but you seem like yourself again." You consider this. "I am still myself," you say. "I've just been learning something." "What sort of something?" You look at your daughter, 19 years old, the child who was born in this house, who grew up in these rooms, who is in exactly that period of being almost finished becoming whoever she's going to be. Dark hair like yours was. Her father's particular way of standing, straight but not stiff. About the body, you say. About what it does and doesn't do and how to respond to it rather than against it. She looks at you with the expression of a young person receiving information they suspect is more significant than they currently understand. "Will I—" She stops. "Yes," you say. "Eventually. Some version of this. Probably not for 20 years or more." "What will I do?" You think about Dr. Hartley and his reduction of mental exertion. You think about Dr. Whitmore and his cold baths in November. You think about the slim volumes written by men about a thing that happens only to women. You think about 7 months of silence and the crack of light that was Margaret saying, "Does your face do this?" and putting her hand flat against her cheek. "Come talk to me," you say. "I'll tell you what I know." Eliza nods. She quiet for a moment. "Does father know? About the window being cracked at night?" "Yes. About everything else, roughly." "He didn't say anything?" "No," you say. "He wouldn't. But he got an extra blanket." She looks at you for a moment, trying to decode this. Then she nods again. A different kind of nod, the kind that means, "I see. I understand something about this that I might not have understood before." She stands. She goes back to whatever she was doing. You return to your book. The morning room is warm enough, but not too warm. The fire is the right size. The window is slightly open. May. The house committee meets on the second Wednesday of each month at St. Peter's. Your church, your committee, 12 women and the vicar, organising the various charitable and practical aspects of parish life. You've been on the committee for 9 years. For the past year you've been on the committee while also being a woman whose body might do something embarrassing at any moment. In May you chair the meeting. This is a thing you've done before, several times. The chair rotates, but tonight you notice it differently. Notice the quality of attention required, the management of 12 people, the agenda, the various opinions that need to be heard and weighed and moved through without offence and with efficiency. The particular skill of knowing when to let a conversation run and when to cut across it. When someone's point is valid and when it's repetition dressed as new content. You do it well. At the end, Helen Forsyth, who's been on the committee for 12 years and is thus the institutional memory of the group, catches you at the door. "You chaired that very well," she says. Helen Forsyth does not give compliments carelessly. She's 60, clear-eyed, the kind of woman who says exactly what she means. "Thank you," you say. "I've been watching you this year," she says, "if you don't mind my saying." You mind slightly. You keep your expression neutral. "There's been something." She shakes her head slightly. "Something you've been managing." "I've been well," you say, which is both true and not true. "I know," she says. "You've been managing it well. That's what I mean." She looks at you with those clear eyes. "I went through mine 15 years ago. Nobody talked about it then either. The word mine, possessive, like it belongs to her, was hers, is over now, is a country she's been through and come back from." "Did it," you begin. "End?" she says. "Yes." She says it very simply. 3 years, in my case. Then it ended. 3 years. You're in month 14. "Is there?" You try again. "There isn't one thing," she says. "There isn't the one thing that fixes it. I want to be honest with you about that. But it ends." She buttons her coat. The May evening is still cool. Get enough sleep when you can. Be kind to yourself when you can't. And don't let anyone tell you that you're less than you were before, because that is the thing that is untrue. She wraps her scarf. She goes out the church door into the evening. You stand in the empty meeting room for a moment. The candles are still lit. The chairs are still arranged in their committee circle. Through the high windows, the last of the evening light is going. The sky moving from pale blue to something deeper. 3 years, she said, but it ends. August. Hot, humid August. London in summer. The river down and smelling bad. The streets slow. The city somehow both exhausted and relentless. You go back to the apothecary. Not for the compound, though you pick that up too, the usual 3-month supply, but because you've been writing something and you want to show it to someone who will understand it. In the grey notebook over the past 14 months you've accumulated, you've been surprised to find, looking back, something close to a system, a set of observations, organised by symptom and by intervention, cross-referenced with timing and severity. It's not a medical paper. It doesn't pretend to be. But it's also not nothing. It's the documented experience of 14 months of paying careful attention to a process that everyone else has been deliberately vague about. You show it to Mr. Martin because he is the person you trust with it. He reads it. You sit in the chair beside the counter and wait, with the slightly uncomfortable feeling of someone who has handed something private to someone they respect and is now waiting for a verdict. He reads it slowly. His face doesn't change while he reads, then he puts it down. "This is very good," he says. "It's just notes." It's systematic notes, organised and cross-referenced. He looks at you. "There's a woman," he says slowly, "a Mrs. Garrett, who's trying to organise some kind of informal exchange between women who have been through this. Notes, comparisons, that sort of thing. Nothing formal. There's no framework for anything formal." He says this with an expression that communicates his opinion of that fact. But she's collecting accounts from women who are willing to write them as a kind of record. You look at your grey notebook on the counter. Would she want this sort of thing? "I think she'd be very interested," he says. You pick up the notebook, turn it over in your hands. 14 months of 3 o'clock mornings, of cold windows and front-laced corsets and calculated port wine abstinences and the Aldgate fog and the apothecary's careful scales. Of Margaret across a tea table saying, "Does your face do this?" Of Dr. Hartley and his bromide and his reduction of mental exertion. Of the dinner party and the drops in your reticule and the 4 minutes you counted while talking to Peter Ashton about ornamental lakes. Of the window cracked at night all winter. Of Charles and his extra blanket. Of Eliza saying you seem like yourself again. Of Helen Forsyth at the church door in May saying it ends. Of 14 months of continuing. "Yes," you say, "I think I'd like to contribute." September. The 2nd September of this. The 2nd autumn. The mornings are cooling again. The September cool that always feels different from January cold. Less harsh, more contemplative. The light changes in September, comes in at a different angle, makes everything look slightly considered. You wake at 5:30. This has become the new normal. Not every morning. Some mornings the old pattern still returns, the 3 o'clock heat, the window. But most mornings now you wake at 5 or 5:30 in the early light, in sheets that are dry. You lie there for a moment. Your hands are slightly stiff. They're always slightly stiff. You flex them, 1, 2, 1, 2, and the stiffness loosens within a few minutes of getting up and starting to use them. You've come to think of this less as a problem and more as a characteristic. One of the features of this body which has become, over the past 18 months, much more specifically known to you than it was before. Charles is asleep. The window is cracked. October is approaching and soon he'll be asking gently whether they can close it at night, and you'll negotiate a smaller crack, a heavier blanket on his side. The city is beginning. Somewhere a cart, somewhere a bell. The particular sound of London assembling itself for another day. You get up. Wash your face with water that's cold but not painfully cold. Dress yourself. The front fastening, the modified corset, both of them so habitual now that you barely think about them. Do your hair by the morning light from the window. You look at yourself in the mirror. 46 years old. The grey at your temples more pronounced now. the lines around your eyes that have deepened this year. Not from aging exactly, or not only from aging, but from something that takes its toll in a different way. The particular look of a face that has been managing something difficult and has found its way through the managing. Your face. You've thought sometimes this year about what Dr. Hartley meant, physiologically, in the physiological sense no longer a woman, as if womanhood were a function rather than a person, as if the body were only its productive capacity. You look at your face, here is what you know. You know the weight of a household managed on interrupted sleep for 18 months. You know the mathematics of a flush, its duration, its triggers, its passage. You know the smell of cold October fog in Aldgate, and the particular weight of a small grey notebook in your hands. You know what it means to sit across a tea table from your oldest friend and have her say a thing neither of you has ever said before. You know what it costs to stand at a drawing room party for 4 minutes with your face doing something you can't control, and your voice saying exactly the right things regardless. You know your daughter's face when she comes to tell you that you seem like yourself again. You know the sound of a church bell at 3 a.m, the way the cold air feels on your skin when the window is cracked, the thrush in the dark testing its notes. You know more about your own body than you have known at any other point in your life. You're not less. You are in fact embarrassingly, humiliatingly, stubbornly, quietly more. October again. The 2nd October. The leaves on the tree outside the morning room window have gone. They went quickly this year. 1 week green, 1 week turning, 1 week gone. The tree is bare now against the October sky, which today is bright and cold and particular. The kind of sky that makes London look like somewhere else briefly before it remembers itself. You're sitting at your writing desk, 3 letters to write. You pick up the pen, you dip it, you begin. The pen moves across the paper without hesitation. Words come, organised, complete. One thought following naturally from the next. You write all 3 letters without stopping. You blot them, you seal them, you put them in the tray. Then you sit back and look at the morning room. The fire is the right size. The window is slightly open. The tree is bare against the October sky. The room smells of the morning. Coal fire and cold air and the tea you finished 20 minutes ago. Your hands are warm. They ache a little. The knuckles, they always ache a little, but they're warm. And now, here, in this moment, in this specific quiet, let it settle. Let the afternoon fade into evening. Let the evening settle into night. Let the house on Wyndham Street go quiet. The servants' voices below stairs, lower, lower. The creak of the building as the temperature drops. The small sounds of a house that knows its occupants, that has learned their rhythms over 12 years. Let Charles come upstairs. Let him get into bed on his side, already pulling the extra blanket up without being asked. Because this has simply become what they do now. This has become part of the architecture of the marriage. The window cracked and the extra blanket. 2 small adjustments that cost nothing and mean something. Let sleep come. Let it come the way it comes more often now. Not at midnight, not in the thick black of the small hours, but later, gentler, in the grey-blue of a quiet night. Your body, this complicated, inconvenient, surprisingly resilient body that has been carrying you through 46 years, through the childhood that you barely remember, through the young womanhood that ended with Charles, and a ceremony and a ring, and a house that became, somehow, the house you know. Through 2 children and 2 recoveries and 22 years of daily ordinary existence in which the body just worked, without asking you to pay attention to it, and then this year, and the next year, and the learning. Centuries from now, someone will understand this better. They'll have words you don't have, concepts you haven't invented yet. They'll understand the system, the hormones, the timing, the physiology, in ways that Dr. Hartley with his bromide of potassium can barely guess at. They'll have treatments that work. They'll have, almost certainly, more than a grey notebook and a correspondence with a woman you've never met, and an apothecary in Aldgate who counts in hundreds. But the woman waking at 3 o'clock, the one lying in damp sheets, the one pushing herself to sitting at the edge of the bed, the one standing at the cold window waiting for it to pass, she will still be there, somewhere, in some city, in some century. She'll still be there, managing, adapting, doing the quiet and enormous work of continuing. Because this is what continues, not the doctor's prescriptions, not the slim volumes written by men, the women. They continue. November brought a particular quality of cold that London specialises in, not the dramatic cold of a hard frost, which at least has the virtue of clarity, but the seeping, damp cold that comes off the river and settles into everything. Into the walls of the houses, into the fabric of your clothes, into your joints, which by November you've accepted are going to ache from October through March with a reliability that almost constitutes a schedule. You go to see Dr. Carter in Bloomsbury. You'd been thinking about it since the Hargreaves dinner, which was 10 months ago now. You'd been thinking about it and not doing it. The way you sometimes don't do things that you've already decided to do because the doing requires a kind of admission. Walking into his consulting room would be an acknowledgement that you've decided to take your own situation seriously enough to seek a second opinion, which would mean implicitly acknowledging that the first opinion was inadequate, which would mean saying out loud something about Dr. Hartley that you're not entirely comfortable saying, even to yourself, even in the privacy of the cab on the way there. But you go. His consulting room is on Montague Street, just off Russell Square, a narrower street than Harley Street, a less expensive building, the kind of address that says, this physician is building something rather than having built it. The brass plate on the door is new enough that you can still see your reflection in it, slightly distorted, a woman in a grey coat standing in the November rain, holding an umbrella that the wind has already argued with twice. You go in. Dr. Carter's waiting room is nothing like Dr. Hartley's. No illustrated London news. No housemaid offering tea. There are 2 plain chairs, a window that looks onto the narrow street, and a wooden desk behind which a young man who might be a secretary is writing something with intense concentration. He looks up when you come in, takes your name, disappears through a door. You sit. The room smells of damp wool, yours, from the rain, and coal fire, and underneath both, the particular faint smell of a medical room. Something astringent, something clean, something that isn't quite antiseptic but is related to it. The fire in the small grate is doing its best against the November damp. You hold your hands toward it, your hands in November. The knuckles thicker than they were a year ago, you think, though it's hard to be certain, because you didn't examine your knuckles particularly before all this, and now you do, and it's impossible to know whether what you're seeing is change or simply a tension. The joints ache when the weather is wet. They respond to warmth the way you respond to warmth, with something that approaches relief, a loosening, a small return of ease. You flex them toward the fire. The young secretary reappears and shows you through. Dr. Carter's consulting room is small and crowded with books, not arranged decoratively, the way a grander physician might arrange them. These are books in use, stacked at angles, bookmarked with slips of paper. some of them clearly borrowed from other shelves judging by the incompatibility of their spines. On his desk there are 3 different volumes open simultaneously, and a notebook covered in handwriting. He closes 2 of the books when you come in, but leaves the 3rd open, which you find you like. It suggests you've interrupted actual work rather than the performance of it. "Mrs. Marsh," he says. He stands, extends his hand in the way that younger physicians increasingly do, as if the handshake is a deliberate choice. His grip is firm, his hands are warm. "I'm glad you came. You remember me from the Hargreaves dinner, you say." "I remember the conversation about ornamental lakes," he says, and there's something in his expression that's not quite a smile but close to it. "And the things underneath the conversation." You sit in the chair across from his desk. "I've been reading The Tilt," you say, "and some of the French material you mentioned." "Brown Sequoia," he says, naming a French physiologist. "And some others. There's a German paper, Kish, 1885, that I found more useful than most of the English writing." He looks at you for a moment. "You read German?" Slowly, you say. "But yes." Something in his face adjusts, the way faces adjust when they receive information that causes a recalibration. He's recalibrating, you realize, from the category of Victorian lady experiencing climacteric, which has a whole set of associated assumptions, to whatever category he's now putting you in. The category of someone who reads German medical papers. The category of someone with the grey notebook. "Tell me where you are," he says. "Start from the beginning, but don't leave out the things you think I'll find tedious." So you tell him. And this time, unlike with Dr. Hartley, unlike the Aldgate apothecary, unlike even Margaret over tea, you tell him everything, the full arc of it. Not just the symptoms, but the thinking, the grey notebook, the patterns you've mapped, the things that have worked and the things that haven't, and your theory about why the bromide made everything worse, the way the symptoms move in relation to stress, the correlation with water intake that you've documented over 3 months, the joint situation, which you've been tracking separately because you suspect it may or may not be connected, and you haven't been able to determine which. He listens. He doesn't write while you talk, which is different from Dr. Hartley. He listens with his hands folded and his eyes on you, and when you finish he's quiet for a moment. "Can I see the notebook?" he asks. You produce it from your reticule. You've been carrying it with you since August, since you showed it to Mr. Martin, because showing it once made it slightly easier to imagine showing it again. He opens it. He reads. You watch him read. His face does things while he reads. Small things, the slight crease of concentration, the occasional pause where he appears to reread something. He turns pages. He pauses on the charts you've drawn, the symptom frequency mapped against the week, the correlation charts between weather and severity, the food diary. He closes it. He looks at you. "This is remarkable," he says. "It's just observation, you say." "No," he says. "Observation organized into hypothesis, tested against evidence, refined over time. That's not just anything." He sets the notebook on the desk between you. "May I ask, do you have a scientific background? Education in—" "I had the standard education for a woman of my class," you say, which means enough mathematics to be considered accomplished, enough literature to be considered cultured, nothing that could be called systematic or practical. "I taught myself the rest." "When?" "Over the past 18 months, you say." He's quiet for a moment. "The Kish," he says. "What did you make of his hypothesis on the nervous system involvement?" "I think he's partly right," you say. The cardiovascular symptoms, the palpitations, the way the heat spreads, those track with what he's describing about nervous regulation. But his treatment recommendations don't follow logically from his own theory. If the mechanism is nervous, then increasing nervous strain through cold shock treatments is exactly backwards. Yes, he says, that's exactly what I think, and I've not been able to say it as clearly to myself. You look at him. He's looking at you with an expression you recognize from somewhere, from the committee meetings, from the better dinner conversations, from the handful of interactions in your life that have been genuinely intellectual rather than social. He's looking at you the way people look at each other when they're thinking about the same thing from different angles. The black cohosh is helping, you say. The compound from the Aldgate apothecary. I know Martin, he says. He knows his botanicals better than anyone I've encountered. Better than most of my colleagues, frankly. A pause. What else? Cold air. That's the most reliable intervention. Cold air on the face and neck during a flush. It doesn't prevent them, but it shortens them. You pause. And water. I keep a glass on the nightstand and drink it immediately when I wake. That also shortens the duration. He writes this down. In his notebook, not on a prescription pad. He writes it down like information he wants to keep. The joints, he says, worse in cold weather, better in warmth, better when I've been moving, worse when I've been still. The thumb joints are the worst. He looks at your hands. May I? You hold them out. He takes your right hand in both of his and examines it with the thoroughness and precision of a man who examines things professionally, not casually. He presses gently on each knuckle. He flexes the thumb joint slowly. He asks you, does this hurt? Does this, more or less than this? It doesn't hurt precisely. It's the kind of examination that reveals where sensation lives, where there's a dull pressure that's been present so long you've stopped noticing it, and where there's nothing, and where there's something sharp that you weren't expecting. There, you say, when he flexes the base of the thumb at a particular angle. He makes a note. I think this is separate from the climacteric proper, he says. I think this is... He pauses, searching for the right level of certainty. A condition of the joints that may be exacerbated by or coinciding with the hormonal changes. The evidence is not clear. Another pause. The evidence on almost nothing relevant to your situation is clear, because nobody has done the work. Because women don't present as subjects of interest to medical researchers, you say. He looks at you steadily. Yes, he says, that's precisely it. A silence. Outside on Montague Street, the November rain is increasing. You can hear it against the window. What do you recommend, you ask? I'm going to be honest with you, he says, and say that I'm uncertain what I can offer that you haven't already discovered yourself. The black cohosh compound, keep taking it. The cold air and water, continue. The joint situation, he hesitates. I can prescribe a salicylate preparation, willow bark derivative. It reduces inflammation. Will it work? For some people, yes. For others, not particularly. I can't predict which you are. You appreciate this. You appreciate it more than you could explain. What I would like to do, he says, and he leans forward slightly, both hands on the desk, is continue this conversation. Not as doctor and patient necessarily, but he hesitates. There's very little systematic information about what actually helps women through the climacteric. What you've documented in that notebook represents more rigorous self-observation than anything currently in the literature. If you were willing to continue keeping records and sharing them, Mrs. Garrett is already collecting accounts, you say. He blinks. You know about Mrs. Garrett? Mr. Martin introduced us by correspondence. He looks at you for a moment with an expression that is, you think, something like delight. Not the condescending delight of someone surprised that a Victorian woman has organised herself. Something more genuine, something that looks like the expression of a man who's been working on a problem alone and has suddenly discovered that other people are also working on it. Of course he did, he says. Of course. You pick up your notebook. You stand. I'll send you a copy of the records, you say, quarterly, and I'll try the salicylate. Mrs. Marsh, he begins. Eleanor, you say, because it's November and you've been at this for 8 months and you've just shown a man your hand joints in the rain and it seems like the right kind of appointment to use first names. He accepts this with a slight nod. Eleanor, you should know that what you've done, the management, the documentation, the lateral research, that's not what most women in your situation do. Most women in your situation come to me, or come to Hartley or Whitmore or any of us, and accept what they're told and manage alone and suffer in a way they don't have to. They do it alone because we don't talk about it, you say. Yes. And we don't talk about it because the medical profession has classified it as something shameful, he says, because the culture reinforces that classification, because there's no infrastructure for women to share what they know. He pauses. I'm aware of the irony that I, as a physician who is part of that profession, am the one saying this. Are you going to do something about it? He's quiet for a moment. I'm going to try, he says. Good, you say. You go out into the November rain. The salicylate preparation does something useful to the joint aches you discover over the following weeks. Not dramatically. It's not the difference between pain and no pain. It's the difference between a constant low-level ache that you're always compensating for and an intermittent ache that you notice mainly when it returns after the preparation has had time to wear off, which is, you note in the grey notebook, information about the mechanism. The inflammation is real. The salicylate addresses it. Therefore, inflammation. You write this down. You write down the dosage and timing, the relationship between the dosage and the weather, the days it helps more and the days it helps less. You write everything down. The grey notebook is filling up. You've started a third section, tabulated, cross-referenced with a summary at the end of each month. You're aware that you've spent more concentrated intellectual effort on this record than on anything in the previous 10 years, which is either a comment on your previous intellectual life or on the motivating power of personal necessity. Probably both. Charles notices the notebook. What is that? He asks one evening, seeing you writing at the writing desk in the sitting room rather than in the morning room where you usually write. You'd moved because the sitting room has the better fire in November, and the joint aches in your hands were making the cold morning room uncomfortable. Medical records, you say. He comes to look over your shoulder, which he does carefully, tilting his head to see the small, careful columns of your writing. Yours? He asks. Mine? He straightens. He stands there for a moment, his hands in his pockets, looking at the notebook with an expression that takes you a moment to read. It's something like respect, with a layer of something underneath that might be guilt. I should have, he begins. No, you say, and you mean it. Mean it specifically and without performance. You didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to tell you. It's not that kind of situation. But I could have. The window, you say, the blanket. Charles, you did what I asked. He's quiet. Is there anything else? He says. Not as a social question, as a real one. the voice of a man who is asking because he wants to know the answer. You look at your hands on the notebook, the thickened knuckles, the joints that have learned to ache in cold weather. Tell the children, you say, not everything, but tell them what's happening. Tell George. He's going to have a wife someday, and his wife is going to go through this. And if nobody tells him anything about it, he'll be like... You stop yourself before saying like you were. Like most men, you say instead. Charles is quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I know enough to explain it. Tell him his mother has been unwell, you say. Tell him she's managing it. Tell him that it happens to women, that there are things men can do, and that one of them is to keep a window cracked at night and get an extra blanket. He looks at you. That's not very much, he says. No, you say, but it's something, and something is considerably more than nothing. He nods. He goes to talk to George. You sit at the writing desk and listen to the distant murmur of their voices from the room above, and you think, this is also a kind of record. The things you pass on, the things that don't get written in notebooks. George comes to find you after dinner that evening. He's 17 and tall in the way of men who haven't finished growing, slightly unsure of his own dimensions, the kind of young man who manages to knock things over and be mortified about it, and then knock something else over immediately afterward. He comes in and stands in the doorway of the morning room with his hands in his coat pockets, and a look on his face that is his father's face 20 years ago. The face of a man who wants to say something and hasn't yet found the form for it. Father says you've not been well, he says. Better now, you say. Getting better. He nods. He stands there. He says... He starts. Stops. He says there are things men can do. Keep the window cracked, you say. Get an extra blanket. He blinks. That's it. It's more than most men know to do, you say. And there's one other thing. What? Listen, you say. When women tell you something about their bodies, about what's happening to them, don't tell them it's nerves. Don't tell them to rest. Don't tell them to reduce their mental exertion. Just listen and believe them. He looks at you with the expression of a 17-year-old receiving information that he knows is more significant than he fully understands yet. Yes, he says finally. All right. He goes. You return to your book. The morning room is warm enough, but not too warm. The fire is the right size. December. The 2nd December. The Christmas preparations again. The pine resin smell. The pudding. The cards. The house familiar in a way it wasn't a year ago. The familiarity now including its 4 o'clock version, its dark window version, its cold kitchen and grey notebook version. The children come home for Christmas, Eliza from her friend's house in Berkshire where she's been spending the autumn, George from school. The house fills up. Mrs. Granger expands her operations to meet the demand, the kitchen operating at a level of productive complexity that reminds you obscurely of a small military campaign. On the 22nd of December, in the late afternoon, you find Mrs. Granger standing by the kitchen window with both hands on the edge of the sink, not moving, staring at the small cold square of grey sky that the kitchen window offers. She doesn't hear you come in, or she doesn't react, which might be the same thing. You stand in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Mrs. Granger is 53. She's been your cook for 8 years. Came to you from the Ashworths, who are leaving for India and couldn't take their staff. She's a large, competent woman whose authority over her kitchen is absolute, and whose general outlook on life tends toward the pragmatic. She solves problems. She doesn't discuss feelings. She produces excellent roast meats and a Christmas pudding that Charles says is the best he's ever eaten. And she does all of this with a consistent reliability that you've always trusted without examining too closely. She's currently standing absolutely still at the kitchen window, both hands flat on the edge of the sink, with a look on her face that you recognize. You recognize it the way you recognize a face in a mirror. You go in, you fill the kettle and put it on the range without saying anything. You get 2 cups. You take the plain one because the good cups are hers by right of kitchen seniority, and you make tea. You put a cup in front of Mrs. Granger on the counter beside the sink. She turns, she looks at the cup, she looks at you. Something moves across her face. Embarrassment first, then something calculating, then something that gives way to something simpler. "Thank you, Ma'am," she says. She picks up the cup. She drinks. You stand across the kitchen from her with your own cup and you don't say anything, because you've learned over the past year and a half that sometimes saying nothing is the thing. She drinks. After a while she sets down the cup. "The Christmas pudding needs another 2 hours," she says. "I know," you say. A pause. "It comes over me sometimes," she says, not looking at you, looking at the Christmas pudding in its basin, which is indeed what it is, the Christmas pudding needing another 2 hours. Like standing too close to the range, only it's not the range. "No," you say. "My mother called it the women's trouble," she says, which tells you nothing useful. "No," you say. "Doctor on the Mile End Road gave me camphor," she says. "For my nerves," he said. "Camphor." Her voice carries a precise quality of professional contempt. "I've used camphor on a roasting joint. I know what camphor does." "There's an apothecary on Aldgate," you say. "Corner of Houndsditch. Name of Martin." She looks at you. "He knows what he's doing," you say. "Better than most of the doctors. He'll ask you questions and listen to the answers and put together something that actually helps." She's quiet for a moment. "Is that where you've been going?" she says. It's not an impertinent question, or it is slightly, but the slight impertinence is earned. She's been running this kitchen for 8 years, and she's looked after you through 2 illnesses and a difficult autumn 2 years ago, and she knows things about the patterns of your household that most people don't. "Since January," you say. "Yes." She picks up her cup again, drinks, sets it down. "The Aldgate place," she says. "Corner of Houndsditch," you say. "Ask for Mr. Martin. Tell him what you told me." She nods once, the nod of a woman who has absorbed information and will act on it in her own time and doesn't require any further input on the matter. "The pudding really does need another 2 hours," she says. "I'll leave you to it," you say. You take your cup and go. In the hallway, the house smells of pine and cold and Christmas pudding, and you stand there for a moment with your hand on the staircase newel post and think, how many women in this house alone? How many women on this street? How many women in this city who are standing at kitchen windows in December with both hands on the edge of the sink, all of them managing, all of them finding their own cold window, their own grey notebook, their own form of continuing, all of them alone with it. January again, the 2nd January. A letter comes from Mrs. Garrett. She is, you've established through correspondence, 51 years old, from Cheshire, married to a solicitor, previously a teacher before her marriage. The handwriting is precise and very fast. The sentences are direct. She asks clear questions and answers your questions with equal clarity. And after 4 months of correspondence, you feel that you know her better than people you've sat across from in drawing rooms for 15 years. This letter is different from the previous ones. "I have been compiling the accounts I've received," she writes, "into something that might be called, with a considerable amount of generosity, a document. It is not a medical paper. It is not a survey in any rigorous sense. What it is, at this point, is a collection of 47 women's detailed descriptions of their experience of the climacteric, organised by symptom and by the effectiveness of various interventions as reported by the women themselves. 47 women. You put the letter down for a moment and think about that number. 47 women who sat down and wrote it out. The symptoms, the doctors, the things that helped, the things that didn't. 47 women who overcame the particular trained silence around their own bodies long enough to put it on paper. You pick the letter back up. Your account, she writes, is by far the most systematic. The chart method is something I've asked several other correspondents to adopt. 3 have done so. The emerging patterns are, I don't want to overstate this, striking. The consistency of the nocturnal timing, the correlation with stress, the near universal failure of the standard bromide prescription to provide sustained benefit, the relative success of the botanical preparations. These appear across account after account with a regularity that suggests we are documenting something real. They are documenting something real. You read to the end of the letter. She wants to share the compiled document with Dr. Carter, whose name you mentioned in a previous letter. She wants to know whether you think he will engage with it seriously. You write back the same afternoon. Yes, you write. Send it to him. He will engage with it. He is one of the ones who will. You seal the letter. You put it in the tray. February. There is a Tuesday in February that you think about afterward as the hinge point. The moment the second year tips into something different from the first. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself as significant. It's just a Tuesday morning in February, the 2nd February, the February of the year you've decided to count as the year of returning. And you wake at 5:45, not at 3, not at 3:30 or 4 or even 5. 5:45, which is in the region of a normal human waking hour, which is something that has become, over 18 months, a category so remote from your experience that it feels like something belonging to another person. You lie there for a moment. The room is dark, but not the absolute darkness of the small hours. There's a thread of grey light at the edge of the curtains, the particular grey of a February morning that is cold and probably foggy, but is genuinely, verifiably dawn. Your sheets are dry. You flex your hands. The knuckles ache, yes, but with the ordinary February ache that you've learned to distinguish from the worse ache, the manageable kind. You lie there in the dry sheets in the dawn light and you do absolutely nothing for approximately 3 minutes, which is the most luxurious thing you've done in 18 months. Then you get up. The morning routine, the kettle, the kitchen in the early light, Mrs. Granger already there, already moving, the range already going. She glances at you when you come in and there's a fraction of recognition in her look. She went to the Aldgate Apothecary in January. You know this, not because she told you, but because Mr. Martin mentioned it obliquely the last time you were in, and she looks slightly different in the mornings than she did in December, a marginally less pressed quality around the eyes. "Morning, ma'am," she says. "Good morning," you say. You make your tea. You sit at the kitchen table. The kitchen smells of bread and fire and the cold that comes in when the scullery door is briefly opened. A clear, sharp February cold that makes you lean into it for a moment. Your hands around the cup, warm. The morning is beginning. And there's something. You sit there with your tea and you try to identify it, and what it is you think is the absence of bracing. The absence of that particular preparation for difficulty that has become, over 18 months, a physical habit. The way you usually begin the day with your body slightly tensed, not dramatically, not consciously. but the way a person who has been surprised repeatedly begins to hold themselves ready for the next surprise. This morning you're not doing that. This morning you're just drinking tea. You notice this the way you'd notice silence after a long sustained noise. By the absence. You sit there for a while. The thrush begins outside, testing its notes. The February light strengthens slightly, from grey to pale grey, from pale grey to the beginning of something that might, if everything goes well, become a morning. You finish your tea, you go upstairs, you write in the grey notebook, 5:45, sheets dry, joints manageable, morning, ordinary, ordinary, march again, the second march, 2 years. You sit with this for a moment. 2 years since the first 3 o'clock waking. 2 years since the first June morning when you stood at the window and waited for the heat to pass and didn't know what you were waiting for. 2 years is long enough to be a teacher. You know things now that you didn't know then. Not just about this, not just about the specific physiology of the climacteric, about the ways that Victorian medicine has systematically failed the women who come to it with perfectly real complaints, about the lateral network of information that exists among women who manage to find each other and say the word. You know things about your own capacity, about what you can do when you don't know what you're doing, but you have to do it anyway. The grey notebook, the third one, nearly full now, is an account of survival. That's what it is. Not medical survival, not survival from an illness, because this isn't an illness and you've stopped calling it that even in the privacy of your own thinking. It's the survival of continuing to be yourself through a process that your culture, your medicine, your entire historical moment has conspired to convince you is the end of yourself. It isn't. You knew this in October, your first October, when you sat in Dr. Hartley's consulting room and thought no longer a woman and felt your face remain composed. You knew it then in a theoretical way, in the way you know things that you believe but haven't yet felt. You feel it now. Spring. The committee meets in April and you suggest a new project, a small lending library of useful books for women in the parish who don't have access to good information about health. Not the books that Dr. Hartley would recommend. Useful books. You've been compiling a list. The German paper by Kish, translated into English by a woman in Edinburgh whose name you found through Mrs. Garrett's network. A pamphlet by a Canadian physician who has been working with herbal preparations for 15 years and whose conclusions align remarkably closely with Mr. Martin's practice. A short account published privately by a woman in Manchester who documented her own experience with what she calls the change years and which is, you think, the most useful 60 pages written on the subject in the English language. The committee considers the proposal. Helen Forsyth votes yes immediately, which carries considerable weight. 2 others vote yes. The vicar expresses some uncertainty about the appropriateness of certain material. You explain, with the composed patience of a woman who has been managing difficult conversations for 22 years, that the material is medical rather than improper, and that the women of the parish who need access to this information do not currently have it, and that the function of a community is to ensure that people have what they need. The vicar is a good man. He's uncertain, but he's a good man. He votes yes. The library is established in June. You donate the first 8 books yourself. By August, 17 women have borrowed at least one of them. By October, your second October, the October of the second year, the bare tree against the bright cold sky. 23 have. You don't know most of their names. You don't need to. The books go out and come back and go out again, slightly more worn each time, pages turned and turned, corners turned down where someone found something useful. That's enough. That's more than enough. And now, here, let the October evening come. Let the tree outside the morning room window stand bare against the sky, the way it does every October, the way it will keep doing whether or not you're standing in this room watching it. Let the fire burn down to the manageable, comfortable level that Agnes banks it to each afternoon. Just enough, exactly enough. Let the last letter of the day be sealed and in the tray. Let the grey notebook be closed, its third volume nearly full, a fourth one waiting blank in the drawer. Let the household settle into its evening rhythms. Charles coming up from his study with his newspapers, Eliza in the sitting room with her embroidery, George at his school but coming home next week, Mrs. Granger in the kitchen managing the evening in her complete and self-sufficient way. Let the sounds of the household reach you where you're sitting. You're at the writing desk. You've been here since 3, working, the afternoon light coming through the slightly open window, the cold October air moving through the room just enough to be present. Your hands are warm. The knuckles ache a little. October, of course, they always ache a little in October. You flex them, 1, 2, and feel the familiar release. You close the notebook, you sit back. 2 years. You've been thinking these past weeks about the woman in Dr. Hartley's waiting room, the one holding her reticule in both hands, the one with the faint sheen at her hairline, not reading the illustrated London news. You never learned her name. You never spoke to her, not a word. You sat across from her for 20 minutes and observed the signs of what she was carrying and said nothing, and she said nothing. And then you both went into different consulting rooms and heard different versions of the same inadequate information and went home to manage in silence. You've thought about her. You've thought, what would it have meant if one of you had simply said something? If you'd looked up from the illustrated London news and said, "Are you here for the same reason I am?" If she'd put her hand flat to her cheek the way Margaret did and asked, "Does your face do this?" Probably she would have been mortified. Probably you both would have been. The rules are very clear. You don't discuss bodies in waiting rooms. You don't discuss the unnameable thing with strangers. But perhaps she would have been relieved. The way you were relieved. That Tuesday over tea when Margaret asked. The relief of recognition. The relief of knowing you're not uniquely suffering. Of knowing that this is not disease, not dissolution, not punishment. That it's simply something that happens, that it ends, that other women have been through it and continue to exist on the other side. That's not nothing. That might be everything. You go to the window, stand beside it. The October street below is doing what October streets do. Carts, pedestrians, the lamplighter making his rounds as the early dark comes in. The gas lamps catching, one after another, pools of yellow light appearing along the street in sequence. The air through the slightly open window is cold. You lean into it, your face turned toward the cold October air. After 2 years, this is still the best thing, still the most reliable. Cold air on your face. It hasn't changed and you don't think it will. The body has its constants, the things that are simply true regardless of what year it is. You stand there for a moment. Then you close the window. Not all the way. Just to the position you've learned. The position that lets some air in without making the room cold enough to disturb anyone who isn't you. You go to dress for dinner. The navy wool dress, not the front fastening one. You can do the back buttons yourself now. Or rather, Agnes does them in the normal way, because Agnes has been doing them for 12 years, and she does them well, and there's no longer a reason to plan around the corset the way you used to. The flush is less frequent, less unpredictable. When it comes, you manage it. When it doesn't, you don't plan for it. This is what improvement looks like. Not the absence of the thing, but the reduction of the territory it controls. Agnes does up the buttons with the steady, practiced efficiency of a woman who has been dressing other women for most of her working life. "There you are, ma'am," she says. "Thank you, Agnes." She goes. You stand at the mirror. 46 years old, going on 47. The grey at your temples is fully grey now, not silver-streaked, genuinely grey. The grey of a woman of a certain age in this particular century with its particular ideas about what that means. You've stopped, this year, doing anything about it. You stopped not as a statement, but as a calculation. The calculation of what's worth the effort and what isn't, which is a calculation that this year has given you considerable practice in making. The grey stays, your face in the mirror, the face of a woman who knows things. Downstairs, Charles is probably already at the dinner table. The children won't be home until next week. Eliza from Berkshire, George from school. It's just you and Charles tonight, in the way it was just you and Charles for years before the children arrived, and the way it will be again, eventually, when they've gone their own directions. You and Charles and the window cracked at night and the extra blanket and 22 years of knowing each other's faces in the dark. You go down to dinner. The dining room is warm, candles lit. Mrs. Granger's excellent autumn beef on the sideboard. Charles is at the table already, reading something. He always reads something until you arrive, puts it down when you do, which is a habit you've always found oddly touching. He puts it down. "Good evening," he says. "Good evening," you say. You sit. The dinner is quiet and easy and good. You talk about ordinary things. A letter he's had from his brother in Edinburgh. The question of whether the coal merchant can be relied on this winter given the price increases, something Eliza mentioned in her last letter about a friend whose wedding is planned for spring. The conversation of two people who've been talking to each other for 22 years and have developed a shorthand so complete it barely resembles the work that conversation is for other people. Halfway through dinner, Charles says, "I spoke to George again. About what you asked me to tell him." He looks at his plate. Cut something. I gave him a slightly more complete version this time. You look at him. What did he say? Charles is quiet for a moment. He asked why nobody talks about it, he says. I told him I didn't know. He said that seemed like something that should change. A pause. He's 17. He says things like that. He's right, you say. Yes, says Charles. He is. He looks at you across the dinner table. His good face. His reliable face. For what it's worth, he says. I think you've managed all of this. He pauses the way he pauses when he wants to say something accurately and isn't quite sure he has the right words. Rather extraordinarily. I didn't have much choice, you say. Yes, you did, he says. You could have done what Hartley said. You could have rested, reduced your mental exertion. The slight emphasis on this phrase is as close to visible contempt as Charles ever gets about anything. Instead, you wrote a notebook full of charts and learned medical German and started a lending library. You look at him. The lending library is the committee's project, you say. Yes, he says, because you proposed it. He looks back at his plate. I'm aware, Eleanor, that I've not been as useful as I might have been this year. Or the year before. I didn't understand. I don't think I entirely understand now. You don't have to understand it, you say. You just have to believe it. I believe it, he says, a pause. I know, you say. I know you do. After dinner, you sit in the sitting room with your book. Charles is in his study, doing whatever Charles does in his study in the evenings. The fire is good. The room smells of the evening, the fire, the wax of the candles, the faint residual smell of dinner. You read. You read because it's pleasant and because you have time and because 2 years ago someone told you to reduce your reading, and you went home and immediately started reading medical journals in German, which is the most precise possible response to that instruction. You read for an hour. Then you go to bed. The bedroom is cool because the window is cracked. Charles will come up later and he'll get into bed on his side and he'll pull up the extra blanket, and by morning the room will have found its temperature. You undress, you wash your face. You do your hair out in the dark, the pins pulled one by one, the hair loose for the first time since morning. You get into bed. The sheets are cool and clean and dry. You lie there for a moment in the dark. The sounds of the city come in through the window gap. The distant clatter of the street. Somebody's voice. Somewhere a dog. The rhythm of London at 9 o'clock at night, settling toward 11 o'clock at night, which will settle toward midnight, which is not your concern. You're not afraid of tonight. This is the thing you notice lying here, that you couldn't have predicted from where you were 2 years ago. Not that the nights are easy. They're not always easy. Not that you sleep without interruption. You don't always. But that you're not afraid of them the way you were in that first year, when every night before sleep had a quality of anticipatory dread, knowing that at some point you'd wake to the heat and the soaked sheets and the hammering heart and the long hours until morning. Now you know what it is. You know what to do. You know it will pass, whether it's 4 minutes or 40 minutes, whether it comes at midnight or 3 or 5. You know the cold window, the cold water, the sitting in the kitchen. You know the patterns and the variations and the limits of its power over you. It has its territory and you have yours, and you've learned over 2 years where the boundary runs. You close your eyes, let the city continue. Let it continue without you, the way it does every night, the way it has continued without every sleeping person who has ever slept through a London night. Let the sounds become background. Let your breathing slow. Somewhere out there a church bell is marking the hour. Somewhere a cab is moving, the slow sound of hooves on stone. Somewhere, in a kitchen much like yours, a woman is sitting at a table with a cup of tea in her hands and a cold that helps, and the long hours of the night arranged in front of her. Somewhere, a woman is standing at a window. Somewhere, a woman is making the particular calculation of how tight she can lace the corset today. Somewhere, a woman is sitting in a waiting room, holding her reticule in both hands, not reading the illustrated London news. And somewhere, this is the thing you hold on to, this is the thing that matters. Somewhere, 2 women are sitting across a tea table, and one of them is putting her hand flat to her cheek, and the other one is about to say, yes, just yes. That small opening, that tiny crack in the silence. Let them find it. Let them find each other the way you found Margaret, the way you found Mr. Martin, the way you found Dr. Carter and Mrs. Garrett and Helen Forsyth at the church door in May. The thread that connects them, the thread that runs, invisible and real, through all the kitchens and waiting rooms and bedroom windows and morning rooms and committee meetings, through all the 3 o'clock wakings and the cold water and the grey notebooks and the things said in the spaces between the things you're officially supposed to be talking about. The thread that holds. Now let it all go quiet. Let the notebook be in its drawer. Let the third volume be nearly full, and the fourth waiting blank and ready. Let the lending library at St. Peter's be open with its 17 books, and let the women of the parish be finding what they need in them, page by turned down page. Let the letters be sent to Mrs. Garrett, to Dr. Carter, to your sister in Bath who wrote back with 12 pages of questions that you answered in 14 pages of response, because your sister deserves 14 pages. Let all of it be done for tonight. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have the window cracked and the blanket heavy, and Charles coming up in an hour, and the grey notebook in its drawer, and the knowledge, slow learned, hard won, yours in a way that nothing else quite is, that you have moved through this, not past it, not over it, through, the way water moves through stone, not without resistance, not without leaving marks, but moving, through. You're still here, still yourself, still the woman who sat at her writing desk one December morning and found she couldn't begin 3 letters, and then picked up the pen and wrote them anyway. Still the woman at the cold window. The woman in the cab on the way home from Harley Street with her hands folded and her back straight, and her face giving nothing away in the anger that came later, properly, at 3 a.m, in the kitchen, where it belonged. Still the woman who told her daughter, "Come talk to me when the time comes. I'll tell you what I know. There is so much to know, and you know it. That doesn't change when you sleep. It will be there in the morning. The morning always comes. The thrush will start its testing notes in the dark before the light, the way it always does, the way it has always done, the way it will keep doing long after the names of everyone in this house have faded into the general archive of people who once lived in London and managed their days and kept their accounts and moved through their difficulties with whatever they had available. The thrush, the light, the morning, let it come. Let tonight be tonight, and tomorrow be tomorrow, and let the space between them be the sleep you've earned. Your body knows what it's doing now, or rather, you know what your body is doing, which is different, which is better. You know it. You trust it. You lie in the cool, dry dark of this bedroom, in this house, on this street, and you are entirely yourself, which is all you were ever required to be, which was always enough. Let sleep come. Let it come like the cold air through the window gap. Quiet, steady, something you've learned to welcome rather than resist. Let the sounds of the city grow fainter, or let yourself grow quieter. It amounts to the same thing. Let the thoughts slow, the grey notebook full, the window cracked, the blanket heavy, the morning coming. Good night.